Hello, friends. Hello. Warmer than I expected. Thank you guys all for coming out. How many of you guys have been to Austin on Rails before? That's what I expected. So, I know actually less of y'all than usual. I'm Brett. I work with Oddbot. I help Damon with this. Feel free to talk to me at happy hour after this, which we're sponsoring. Want to thank Capital Factory for letting us use the space. And then I've got to remember not to forget anything. I've got Damon watching me here. This is the first time this has happened. Who has announcements? Anyone?
You do.
I have an announcement that there are no tickets available for Keep Ruby Weird. I don't know what other announcement I would have. No community announcements?
There's a conference called Keep Ruby Weird.
Where can I get tickets?
There are no tickets available.
Oh, that's right.
If anybody wants to sell theirs, you can make a pretty good profit, maybe.
We may need some volunteers, so feel free to also talk to us about that at happy hour.
I do have something. So, hey, so I signed us up to have a table at the Austin Startup Crawl. So if anyone wants to help chat with people about Austin on Rails, whatever, if you just want to chat with people during the crawl, we have a table and we're looking for volunteers to help us man the table for at least part of that time. So if you're going to go to the crawl, or you live near downtown or whatever, we could appreciate a little bit of help with the table there. There's going to be some other meetup groups there, and I just said, hey, that's a cool opportunity. They're not charging us for it. Let's help, you know.
When is that?
It's the 8th of October. Yeah, and it's in the evening. It's like 5 to 10. Yes, sir.
Are there Keep Ruby Weird tickets involved?
Let me see. That's a no. All right. Anyway, thank you. So ping me or Austin on Rails on Twitter or Britt, anyone. Thank you.
All right, so now the ever important directions to the bathroom portion of the evening. Straight through these doors, take a right. If you're a man, take a left. If you're a woman, take another right. And then the bathrooms will be on your left or right. I think if you get that far, you'll be all right. So the agenda is basically, I'm going to get through this nervous part of the evening, and then we are going to have our first speaker. Then we're going to do a raffle for a ThoughtBot book, which Caleb will tell us more about then. That will also do looking for employees, looking for jobs, which we'll get up here, quick little mingling, and then basically continue that at happy hour after the fact. So before we get started in talks, though, I want to thank our food and drink sponsor, which is The Honest Company. And Alan's going to come up and briefly talk to us about what they do and where they're at and why they have an engineering team. Woo!
Hey everyone, I'm Alan with The Honest Company. Thanks for having us out tonight. It's great to be here. I also am on the nervous side with my friend Brett here because, like you, I like to code. So, anyways, The Honest Company, can you raise your hand real quick if you know who we are, what we do? All right, one of them is an employee. So The Honest Company sells consumer products. We're focused on delivering safe, effective, family-friendly products for your home, children, and now even your face with the launch of the Honest Beauty line, which I know has really excited Titus. If you know Titus, you understand.
My dog's gonna have so much lipstick.
Yeah. And we started, I think, close to 4 years ago. We haven't come quite to our 4th anniversary. We're growing wildly, which is exciting. The biggest question that I get, and the one thing that I want to share with y'all is like, why does Honest have an engineering company? Obviously, as a consumer products company, we aren't delivering technology products to our clients, but essentially the answer is we're delivering technology products to the business so that they can deliver all this awesomeness to our clients. And we started as direct-to-consumer e-commerce subscriptions. Everything's in the cloud. We have a Rails stack. Kind of grew up like a typical startup would with a Rails app that grows and grows and grows and becomes monolithic and gigantic. And we've broken it down into services and really ended up with quite a neat set of different things to work on. So all the tools that the business uses to deliver delight, as we like to say, to our customers. We're built by the tech team, so it makes us an integral part in everyone's jobs, and we really have a culture there where if the business needs to get something done, they come to the tech team and they ask for ideas on solutions. Everything from content management, our customer service system, of course the e-commerce site, and all of the things that are involved in that, from payment processing to fulfillment and delivery. Of course, we don't deliver them ourselves, but you never know, maybe drones will be involved someday. So that to me is really exciting, because everywhere the business is doing work, the tech team is involved, and as an engineer, it keeps things from getting stale. You're not faced with the same problems over and over again. We're really kind of tackling new ones always, and because of that, we're growing. And so we're trying to build our Austin engineering team. We have an office out north, and right now we have a team of 6. It's cross-functional. A few of us are here tonight. We've got Titus, who's on our QA team. Ken's in the back. He's our DevOps guy. And Lindsay's going to be here in a little bit. She's on our QA side as well. I represent the dev side. And we have another developer and an IT support person as well. So we've got a well-rounded team, but we need to make it bigger. So any of you who are interested in looking at a career at Honest, please talk to me during the beer drinking portion, and I will refrain from commenting on how many beers you should have before we have that conversation. I think that's about it for me. If you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, but I just think it's a lot of opportunity for an engineer, and it's great to be here. Thanks again.
Before we jump into the talks, I want to back up the agenda. I've had a little time to reflect, and I skipped a major part. So I want to thank Cory for coming from North Carolina to talk to us today. He is with the Iron Yard. Cecy's our first speaker, and she actually just graduated the Iron Yard. Most of y'all, I'm guessing, probably know Cecy from Refresh fame. So on that note, Cecy.
Let's hope this works, friend.
Can I maybe do it from here? It feels like I'm so far away.
You can. That would be unorthodox, but
Okay.
you can move the podium if you want, whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
We'll just do it from here.
We can move the room closer.
Hello. So, usually, I teach for Girl Develop It, and usually it's like a small room. So I'll do classes like that, maybe once or twice a month, but it's literally like a smaller area. That's usually what I'm used to. So that's why I'm like, y'all feel so far away. So anyway, I'm gonna talk about material design and how to materialize your Rails app. So this is going to be a guide to using material design in your Rails app. So who am I? My name is Cecy. You can find me on Twitter at Cecy Correa. And then also I co-organize Refresh Austin. Been doing that for a few years now. If any of you ever have an awesome talk you'd like to give, let me know and we can do that. Not to try to steal your speakers. And then also, like I was saying, I'm the co-chapter leader here of Girl Develop It ATX. I've been teaching for them about 2 years, and I typically focus on a lot of more like designy stuff. But we're just getting started with like a Rails curriculum, so I'm excited about that. Anyway, so like Britt just said, I actually just made it through the Iron Yard pretty recently. My background was mostly design, so I'm new to backend. And from that perspective, I still always cared about design, and maybe sometimes during homework I would spend just a little bit too much time on CSS. But quickly I began to realize that even though designers really hate frameworks like Bootstrap and things like that, you don't always have the time to spend on making something look unique or whatever. You just want to have something that's functional, but that it also still looks good, and that's something that I definitely care a lot about. So then front-end frameworks became my BFFs. from that point on. And I actually, one of my former coworkers would probably kill me if I said this. His name is Ian Carrico. I don't know if any of you know him from the PHP community. He wrote a blog post called "You Don't Need Bootstrap," which he wrote it like 2 years ago, and to this day it's still like one of the most visited blog posts that the company ever wrote, and he doesn't even work there anymore. So like now that I'm about to say that, like, you know, front-end frameworks became my BFFs once I made the transition to backend, because I still cared about how the design looked like for the things that I was working on, and I didn't always have the time to like spend a lot of time on design, or sometimes I didn't have access to a better designer. These frameworks became my BFF. So Bootstrap, Foundation, which a lot of people don't really like. I actually liked Foundation a lot better for a while. But now I really like Materialize, which is the new kid on the block. Yeah, I had to make that joke because I was a child of the 80s. So yeah, now I really, really dig Materialize, and Materialize is a framework that is based on the design principles of material design. So that's part of the reason why I really like it. So I'm gonna talk about Materialize, the front-end framework, and I'm gonna talk a little bit about material design and design principles there, but mostly I'm gonna try to focus on that framework. So Materialize, the front-end framework, the movie based on the best-selling novel. Not really. What I hope you get out of this talk is, I know that I'm obviously talking to a room of people that probably don't touch design all that much on a day-to-day basis, so I hope that that can continue to be the case for you. But for those times where you need some sort of design help, whether it's, you know, maybe you're working on an open source project and you don't have access to a designer, maybe it's a personal project, maybe it's a prototype and you need to make something look good. I know the default is always, you know, throw some Bootstrap on it, but, you know, I hope that after this talk maybe you can consider Materialize as an alternative framework for those instances. So before I start talking more about why I think material design and Materialize is so cool, I want to give you a very biased, quick history of design. To just kind of like talk a little bit about where I'm coming from and why I think this is important. So we all probably remember GeoCities. How many of you had GeoCities or Angel Fire? Were you on like an Angel Fire ring? Yeah. That was my first website ever. And the reason I picked this one is because of the like star background. I totally had a star background. I tried to pick a site that actually looked like that first website that I built on GeoCities when I was like, oh man, like, I don't know, in high school. So this is very much what that looked like, and I thought it was awesome. And I had a blog before a blog was even a thing. Like, there wasn't even a word for a blog, and I was all about updating my GeoCities constantly, and this was cool, I guess. And then a few years later, and I'm way oversimplifying this, but a few years later, we started getting a lot of sites like this. And this is J.K. Rowling's site back in the early aughts. That's what we're calling them, aughts. So this was her site. You can even see it was 2005 when she was about to release Half-Blood Prince. And this was it. This was her actual site. Can anybody tell me, like, where would you find anything here? Like, for real. So I don't know if you can see my mouse. Essentially what they wanted you to do is, I get where they were coming from. They wanted this to be experiential, and they wanted you to, like, you know, if you like hovered over the paper clips, like FAQs would pop up and you could click on that and read them. Or like if you clicked over here on the T, it would have like, I don't know, like a quiz question. Like, they wanted to make it so that it was like engaging and you could like discover things. But like, how would we translate this to mobile? And I tried to find a screenshot of this, but like they did have a text-only version. And this is really sad that I remember this because I spent a lot of time on this website back in the day. But yeah, the text-only version was terrible. Couldn't really find anything. You couldn't really engage with it. So I feel like but that was good design, and that was kind of what Flash like made us do. And if you remember a lot of those sites back in those days, they were like a little rectangle because they could only be just as long as like your viewport for Flash could be like. So you ended up with a lot of really samey, squarey looking sites that don't really translate well outside of a desktop experience. So then fast forward to the responsive revolution, all of a sudden we have flat design. And sure, I mean, it looks nice, it's flat, wow. It's so flat. And we think this is cool, and we're all like, yeah, we're all about like simplifying stuff, and it's gonna load fast on your phone. I feel like that's part of the reason why things have become like so simplified. And I realize that I'm kind of talking shit about flat design, and material design is very flat. I realize that. But yeah, I mean, I feel like right now this is kind of like what we're in right now. And yet, you have websites like this, shopgene.com, that I don't know if any of you have teenage daughters or know teenage girls, maybe a cousin or something. Like, this is like super hot right now. And this website is pretty much everything that was wrong with design back in the early aughts. Like, this website, I actually want to like load it up so that you can see what it looks like. It is animated GIFs everywhere. It is bevel and emboss. It is just, oh my gosh. Oh yeah, and your cursor, check it out. Check out that cursor. So this is not ironic at all. Actually, I wanted, some of my instructor students for the Rails Rumble last year, they're also Iron Yard students. They created this. It's called twax.com. And this was a way which actually worked for you to fax something and then it would tweet for you. But this whole thing, oh yeah, and you can see it's like this bird takes over your cursor. So this is ironic though. We're making fun of this. Whereas this is totally like authentic. This is like what they think is cool because retro is cool now. So what I'm trying to say with all of this is that design is a flat circle. So we essentially went from this to this to this to this now is cool, which is a throwback to this, but we think this is cool. So I feel like design is this flat circle. We're always going towards a new trend. And sure, you know, you can say that with each trend things are getting better, but I feel like we are trying way too hard sometimes to really reinvent the wheel. And that's because I feel like we don't have a universal language, visual language for web, for mobile, for digital, for, you know, whatever. There was a great talk last year at Keep Ruby Weird. Here's the video, and I'll send out the link to the slides if you want to check out this talk. It was a really great talk by this guy, Paul Batley? I don't know how to pronounce his name. And his talk really stuck with me because he was talking about how, from a language perspective, especially logographic languages where a symbol represents a whole word, you know, we're good at that. As human beings, we have whole languages that revolve around that concept, right? And yet, when it comes to describing things and using icons for things like menus, there's one way to approach it, menu with a hamburger icon, and then you have maybe just the word menu in a blue box, and then maybe you just have whatever that is. So we still haven't figured out from an icon perspective we haven't really agreed on the things that we should do to create visual cues for our users. Here's another example, a save icon. That stopped being relevant years ago. By the way, I don't know if you noticed, I'm gonna totally go back here. There's a floppy disk right there. Who the hell was using floppy disks in 2005? Nobody, okay? So, I don't know our infatuation with floppy disks. I don't know where that comes from, but yeah, they're irrelevant, and yet persistently, we continue to see the floppy disk as the international symbol for save icons, where I bet you that anybody that was born in the 90s probably doesn't remember, hasn't even seen a floppy disk. So why don't we have a visual language that we can all agree on, that can be kind of universal, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time? So I feel like that's where material design comes in. And yes, I realize that, yeah, this is Google, and this is how they're telling you that you should design websites and apps for the Android, and it's kind of like they're trying to push you towards their little empire, right? But the reason why I like material design is because I feel like this is the first time that someone has said, hey, let's figure out how to talk web or mobile or whatever. Let's figure out what this means from a visual perspective. Let's try to have some guidelines. So yeah, sure, there are a lot of other style guides that companies have open source that you can go and see. But in terms of just sheer documentation and thought process and like an actual contribution to the like community, I feel like material design by far blows everything out of the water. So yes, material design, not a framework. Although there is a framework for it, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today, later. As a set of principles, it's pretty easy to follow because it's essentially saying you need to stay authentic to the digital representation of what you're trying to do. And yes, you can have depth, but you don't have to get crazy skeuomorphic like J.K. Rowling did. Or, well, she personally didn't, whatever horrible plays decided to make that website. And I feel like these are also rules that anybody can leverage. So even if you're not following material design by heart, I feel like still taking a look at that and taking a look at those principles can be really helpful as you're trying to think about like that visual language of the web or of just digital. And like I said, it's not based on any ridiculous ideas of the real world. So you're not trying to make a calculator actually look like a calculator and things like that. That's crazy. So yeah, we don't want that. That's terrible. So just yesterday, Starbucks released this article on how they use material design for their Android app, and I thought it was really cool to see their approach, and you can see how really like versatile those principles are. So even though this is like very obviously specific to Starbucks, and they're using their brand colors on top of material design, it still looks really good, and it still looks very much like their brand. So I feel like there's still, even with a brand sort of like appropriating these principles, there's still like a lot of versatility there. So that's the article. If any of you want to take a look later, it'll be on the slides. So then, okay, you want to material, how to material. So you can read the spec. It's right there, and then you just go ahead and read it. I'm just gonna be standing here, and in about an hour, let me know if you have any questions. Just kidding. Yeah, nobody has time for that. I actually have spent quite a bit of time reading over the material design spec, and I find it fascinating. Oh, whoa, how are you supposed to do transitions? What? But not everybody finds it as fascinating. And that's why you have Materialize CSS. So Materialize CSS is a framework that is essentially, they already did all of the work for you. They've already figured out button sizes, they figured out the transitions, they figured out the colors even, they figured out a lot of the animations. So all you have to do is literally just grab it and work with it like you would with any other framework. And it even has a very robust color palette to choose from. So even if you're like, I'm a developer, I don't really deal with colors, like, can you go on a page and pick 2 colors? Can you kind of do that? Then you're good, and you can make something that looks awesome. Cons, it's still pretty new. It's still in alpha, but I mean, I've used it quite a bit, and I feel like it's good, but Anyway, so how do you get it in your Rails app? Get it in my belly. There's two main ways, and not really two, I'm lying to you, there's more, but sort of two. And like, when I started looking into it, I was like, okay, so what is the best way for me to use this framework? And I went down a rabbit hole that I hope to spare some of you some of the tears that I shed while I was going through this rabbit hole. So yeah, there's a gem for that. You guessed it. But then there's also Bower, which I like because I like their logo. Pretty much, if you have a cute animal as your logo, I'm gonna like you. So if you decide to go the Bower route, you can go just straight up Bower. I mean, like straight up install from npm, Bower install, Materialize that shit. But the con from this approach is that it is super configuration heavy, and you will have problems deploying to Heroku. And you also have to reconfigure all of your font paths, and nobody wants to do that. So I'm just gonna go ahead and tell you, don't do that. I feel like it all depends. If you're maybe already using Bower in your environment, then maybe this makes sense. But if you're not, straight up Bower just takes too much configuration. So I would say don't go that path. Bower Rails is obviously the gem for Bower that you can use with Rails. There is some config that you need to do, but it's not terrible. It's pretty okay in terms of yes.
Is there anything wrong with the first Materialize gem that you mentioned?
I wouldn't say that there's anything wrong, but the thing about this is that like with your with the asset pipeline, then you have to kind of like do a little bit of hacking because Bower wants to install everything by default on a root level folder called Bower Components.
I'm talking about the gem. Like you said, the very first thing that you mentioned was the gem.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Were you going back? Are you going back?
I was gonna go back and talk about the gem.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
All right.
I always like to look at like, okay, there's a gem for everything, but like, is there an alternative to that? Because I don't always just want to throw gems at the problem.
Right.
So that's why I was kind of seeing like, okay, well, if you don't want to go that route, there are other ways that you can go about it. And even though I just said like, I don't just want to throw another gem at the problem, hey, here's a gem called Bower Rails. But honestly, like if you are gonna work with Bower in your Rails app, I found it like a lot of people have like said on the documentation that it's like, oh, it's hard and like blah blah blah. But I found it really easy to just get started.
Okay.
So there's actually a blog post that will be linked in the resources for this approach. So in this approach, you just install Bower as a gem, and then you install Materialize through Bower. You might run into some issues when you're trying to deploy to Heroku. I've seen a lot of people complain that, especially if they went the straight up Bower route where they're not using that gem, straight up their fonts don't work in production. So that's why a lot of the configuration comes from. So I feel like if you're deploying in Heroku, this might be something that you want to keep in mind, that you might run into issues. I did not run into any issues when deploying to Heroku using the Bower gem. Then there's also obviously Rails assets, which is pretty sweet. It really took about like 30 seconds to do, and then you're up and running, and I deployed to Heroku using this with no issues. And then, yep, there's another gem called Materialize SaaS. And the reason why I didn't want to just like jump out and say, hey, there's a gem, use it, is because this gem is not necessarily like maintained by the people that put on Materialize CSS. This is like someone else that was like, hey, I'm gonna port it into a Rails gem. So that's why I was a little bit like, is there another way that I can do it? But yeah, I mean, this one is also pretty straightforward, and I did not come across any deployment issues when I used this. Guess what? You know how I say that Bootstrap sucks? So yeah, there's a Materialize flavor of Bootstrap now. So I feel like if you're familiar with Bootstrap already and you want to try out like some material design, this might be a good option if you are just looking to play around with it. The con that I found with using this specific flavor of material design for Bootstrap is that I don't feel like it's a very faithful interpretation of material design, and that is just in the way that it was kind of implemented. I feel like it's a little hacky. I don't know. I think Materialize is like a better implementation of material design if you want to go with a framework. But it's also, you know, if you're familiar with Bootstrap, again, you might want to check that out. This one does not have a Rails gem, so for this you would have to use something like Bower to get it in your Rails app. So yes, I built something that you can take a look at, and if y'all want to take a look at it, those of you that have a laptop, I made a handy dandy bit.ly link. So if you go to cecy.co/roar-rails, you can see it. It is on the Heroku's. And this is essentially Roar's Twitter for lions. So this is just like the plain implementation of Materialize. By default, it has this really ugly like tomato-y pink, which is not super great, but all of the primary colors can be really easily overwritten, and there's documentation on Materialize or materializecss.com. So that's kind of what it looks like, and if you just want to kind of take a look at what I wrote, it's not, I totally, you know, put this together today, so don't judge me. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple to just like get the nav. This is probably super small. So I just threw a nav in there, put it in a container. There's a special class for your logo, and then for the cards themselves, it literally is just a div class called card panel. So it's super easy. And then you have something like this, nice sort of card-based design that you can totally go. And then, for example, I did not spend any time styling the form, and already like it's kind of sexy. How it highlights, boom, boom. It's really nice. And like I said, this is just like literally like on top of the default, didn't have to do anything. If I wanted to spend just a little bit more time to make this a little better, I would probably throw this in a container and it would look better, but this is just vanilla Materialize CSS, and I feel like it's really cool. That's pretty much all I have, but before I leave, I'll definitely share this with you if you want to take a look at the resources that I have. Then I also wanted to plug a reminder. So I hope that some of you are going to keep Ruby weird, and those of you that missed out, too bad, so sad, because you're gonna miss out on an awesome Ruby karaoke party Saturday. For those of you that are going, I hope that I see you there.
Not this Saturday.
Not this Saturday, no. This Saturday, the weekend of the conference. So like a month from now, ish. Yes.
So if I'm already on Bootstrap,
yes,
is it difficult to switch to?
I would go with that Bootstrap, Materialize Bootstrap first, and see how that looks. Yeah, I think that was probably the easiest way.
You mentioned that Materialize is a reasonable sort of replacement for Bootstrap. My question is, if I embarrass myself at Ruby karaoke, will you hold it against me?
Not at all. Especially if you don't hold it against me.
No judgment. I mean a little bit, but.
I do like to sing The Lonely Island, so.
I'll work on that.
That's awesome. Awesome.
Thank you very much, Cecy. She actually didn't tell you guys she's leading the Saturday event that is the Ruby Karaoke. So it's not like she was just really excited about it and wanted to tell you all about it. She's actually in charge of it. Okay, so now we're going to take a break, but before we do that, real quick, who is looking for a job programming computers using Rails? All right. Good deal. How many people are looking to hire people that are programming computers? Okay. Well, it's a seller's market here, it looks like. So if you guys can be right up here. We're also going to wrap. Oh yeah, Caleb. Actually, you need a computer too, because we're using Raffler. I didn't get that thing working again, not to use it. But I was going to let you pick a book and
Just whoever wins can come and ask me for a book copy.
why don't you tell them a little bit about some of our books while I try to find a computer?
Oh, you don't remember?
Okay, so we've got about 10 different books. Some of them are currently being written, some of them are already done. If you win the Thoughtbot book, just let me know which one you want. I'll send you the link to take a look at all of the titles. I'll add you to it.
Thanks, buddy.
All right, so the one person who's looking for work, come up here, and then I have words of people that are looking to hire. You guys come up here as well. The rest of you can go to the bathroom or chill out. We're going to get the Raffler set up, and then you can line up if you're in here.
Fred, what network do I need to be on? Oh, there it is.
Oh,
Now I see it.
sorry, I didn't realize you were on that yet.
I will. It just hasn't been.
We also have swag packets for. Yeah, you guys just want
And we've got a little beauty pack thing here. There looks to be a limited number. If you want softer skin, help yourselves. These are compliments of Gianna's company. So.
Hey, Brett, what's the name of the airplane? Is it Congress or is it Airplane? I know, I saw that.
You can't do that. But are you on the Capital Factory Wi-Fi?
I'm on the Capital Factory yet.
Oh, I think maybe.
That's fine.
I think it would be better.
Well, I'd rather do it this way.
Okay. Yeah, no problem at all. I have to like use some other piece of equipment I've never used before. But hold on, ready?
Oh, you've done something. Yes, I think you've done something.
I think we're good here.
Yes. Yes.
All right, so now we need to go to Raffler, if we may. Thank you for letting us use your computer. I think it's, yeah, let me.
I go right here. Forget I said it. Forget I said it. I didn't tell anybody it's associated with it. Let's move on.
Oh, they're gonna.
Oh, and then I guess anybody that's interested in the raffle, Raffler is up and ready for you to enter your names. You guys are familiar with that.
First time looked at this. Type it in. Type it
That would be a first for them.
I've seen worse.
You get to see everyone. You can raise other people's names to
It's an unbiased Yeah, we were driving to oh, that's right, I spoke there. Oh yeah, that's and the entire front row was like the E.T. from Tinder. No, I've been following it. Have you been? I've been following somebody else. I still no, just don't you know what you said that. Yeah,
I've been informed there's only 4 people signed up for the raffle. I think we can do better. You just go put your name into the text box on that laptop and you can win a free book. Who doesn't like books? Especially free ones.
I like books.
And now I'm getting better about this. All these people that are eager to learn. Taylor, plug your book to those people back there and tell them to put their names in his computer.
Can we move this podium the other way? Is it guess after this? They're raffling a book. Is it? I don't know. What's your name?
You're in there.
I don't have a rail book. He has every book. I did not write a rail book.
Let's do it.
I started writing a scrum book.
You want to
For God's sake. I just wanted your blood pressure.
It's like writing a book about how to rape your nephew.
That, I don't know. I think the mic was able to find. Come on, Travis. There it is.
Sweet. You want to move this out?
Yeah, you might.
Stacy. I mean, obviously.
Right there. Are we ready? How many winners are there?
I guess just one. Yeah, so.
He has every book. I think that's. Are you gonna You should totally type your name in. Just type your name in and it'll show up there. Because I'm using sunscreen. Awesome. That's fine.
What do you mean?
They're only picking one winner. Oh, 15 seconds in between.
Give them 2 more minutes of 7:55, then we'll start corralling and hello, friends.
I don't.
How's everybody doing? Good. You guys seem happy. I'm happy you guys are happy. All right, so nobody else wants to be in the raffle. Okay. Push the button.
Will that work? There. There it goes. Oh, I see. Oh, it's going to be He Has Every Book, isn't it? It is. Oh, no. Oh, no. Oh!
Show yourself.
Oh, it does make it.
Online books. All right, guys. Cory, thank you again. We're going to be ranting that about Rails. Without further ado.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hey, congrats. What book was it that you just won?
You want whatever I want.
Just whatever you want?
In the world.
That's pretty awesome. That is a great prize. So, hi everyone. Thanks for. Am I too loud? No. Okay. Hi everyone. Thanks for having me out. My name is Cory. I am the Director of Corporate Education for the Iron Yard. And what I want to talk about tonight is a gentle rant about architecture and Rails. So right now, so a little bit about my background first. So I come from the software world, dress notwithstanding, right? Like I know that I'm not dressed like a software developer, but I promise you that I have written code. Oh, Keynote just crashed. That was awesome. Oh my gosh. See, I told you bad things can happen. All right, hold on. So,
It's a powerful presentation.
it is, I guess that's how it is. Let's see. It's called Rails Rant. Here it is. Okay, so. There we go. Okay, so prior to joining the Vineyard, I have a background in the software world. So I've gotten the chance to work with a lot of different software companies and seen Rails for a very long time. In fact, I gave a Ruby talk at a Microsoft conference twice. So I'm pretty excited. One of them called Ruby is Love at the Mix conference in Las Vegas, which was a lot of fun. So, if you don't mind humoring me, I'd like to step on a gentle soapbox here tonight. See, in a previous life, I dealt with actual fires as the assistant chief of a 50-person department. And as part of that, I spent a lot of time with Rails, mostly commercial trains, but occasionally passenger trains. And I love the idea that Austin wants to be completely connected through Rails, like the mission of this group. And I have some reservations that I'd like to share. Sorry, I'm getting a message I'm supposed to give a software talk. Okay, that's cool. I'll talk about the other kind of Rails. Does anyone remember how awesome the promise of Rails was when it first came out? Like, it was supposed to be, like, just amazing. Like, if we look at this shell script I had written, right? We're going to create a new Rails app, push it to Heroku, and just wait for money, right? And if we ran that, the app would deploy, and it would just be money rolling in. Like, that was Rails, right? Like, Rails was just awesome. And we forgot kind of about that, right? We forgot that Rails is a lot of fun for people. If you don't know life before Rails, like the idea of building a blog app in, hey, I wrote Cold Fusion before it was Java, like in ASP, classic ASP, not the ASP that is located in .NET, right? Like that kind of stuff, we had to do routing and we had to do all that stuff ourselves. And the idea of Rails was awesome. It was magical. It was fun, right? And even today, I find a lot of joy in working with my Rails projects. And the influence of that paradigm, model view controller, how many of you are using Node.js? A couple of you, or okay, let me rephrase that. How many of you played with Node.js? This is a Rails script, you're not going to admit to using Node.js. All right. Right, a lot of the paradigm of model view controller and of the idea of active record, that models are tied to the database, or that we have a way of connecting that paradigm shift, that the influence of Rails is evident in so many projects. But there's a lot of stories out there which say that like Rails isn't that fun after a while. The fun button's still there, but the light bulb's burned out and the button's cracked, and it shocks you about every third time you press the button. That it's not possible to build scalable, maintainable Rails applications. In fact, the very mention of Rails like, oh, we're going to use Rails, and suddenly on your hard drive, code like this shows up, and you're like, where did all those before filters come? Why do I have all of this in my controller, right? Like stuff like, why am I doing, Oracle can only handle 1,000 entries in an in statement, so we batch it in 500 as part of a query, right? And then we do other selects from it. Or my favorite, which is this thing. So let me tell you a story about this. This is a story, so Justin and I worked together on this project that this is showing many years ago. We had a project where people, as part of that, could enter dates for things, as you can imagine people would need to do. However, this particular group of users were very special. And the things that they said needed to happen. And one of the things that they wanted to happen was, if I didn't know exactly when something was, if I thought that it was like October of '95, but I wasn't entirely sure, you better not make me put in October 1st of 95. Right, but I want it all sorted like it's correct in dates, right? Like that all still needs to work. So we had to create this thing called a date confidence field. So in the back end, we stored everything as dates. But whenever they entered a date, we had to figure out how confident they were in the date. Is it year only? I typed in 1993. Or is it, May of 2007? Or did they have a specific date? And so internally, we would store everything as dates and sort properly and all that, but externally on the display of it, we would use this algorithm to figure out where all that was. And the other thing that this doesn't show was you kind of see some chronic stuff in there, which is a gem for parsing it. Right? They wanted to be able to just type in JUL95, and we knew what that was. Right? Like it was pretty wise. Like some of them wanted to type in like fall 2002, and we were like, no. Right, that's not going to work, right? But the problem is that we think that in Rails that there isn't a way to build a maintainable application, that we are all doomed to Rails becoming this giant monolith of applications. And that if we don't get things under control and right up front, that we're doomed, right? And that's got us living under this fear that creeps in our brains, and the brains of the next generation of developers who are going to be using that you have to get things right up front. And that is, it destroys some of the magic of Rails to say like, Rails, that's fine, but if you don't do all of this, it's going to be an unmaintainable mess, right? So there's a guy named Christopher Alexander who wrote a book called The Timeless Way of Building. And he says this: we have so far beset ourselves with rules and concepts and ideas that we've become afraid of what will happen naturally and convinced that we must work within a system and within methods, or our surroundings will come tumbling down in chaos. Now, tumbling down to Christopher Alexander was like literal because he's a building architect, right? And he's not talking about software here. He's like talking about building buildings, right? But that's how we've become. And I see so much of that in our industry now, that we've become afraid of saying, what happens to our code as we write it? Like, let's pay attention to what our code is telling us and understand how to modify that, and not just, you have to start with a solution, and if you don't, you're messed over. So let's role play for a few minutes here. Let's all explore something together. So this is an interactive application, or an interactive session, or whatever, which means I want to hear something from you all, okay? When I tell you to. Okay, what is this?
Fire.
Fire, yes. Is it bad? No. Sorry, that's a Frankenstein joke. Okay, so yes, this is fire. And what should you do to fire if you are a firefighter? No, you shouldn't roast marshmallows. You're a fire. I gave you the context for it. You should do what?
Shoot water on it.
To do what?
Put it out.
Yes. You should put it out, right? And you should put it out by putting the wet stuff on the red stuff, because some firefighters, you point the hose that way and you're good, right? And for hundreds of years, this was pretty much how they operated, right? This was the strategy. Firefighters, members of the community, these weren't paid crews, these weren't anything like that, right? They would hear an alarm, like a giant bell, in their city, and they would all come together in whatever they were wearing, and they would carry buckets to the fire, and they would throw buckets on the fire, because they didn't have any other technology. And even whenever they started getting the notion of fire pumpers and things like that, it was basically a cart with water on it that they didn't have to carry buckets so far, right? And whenever they went to, typically it just burned to the ground, because really, what else could they do? And they certainly didn't have any strategies or tools for being able to go inside a building without being injured or killed. So over the past 70 or so years, that's changed quite a bit. And the modern firefighter possesses a lot of tools and pieces of safety equipment. So they've got special boots and gloves. They have bunker pants and coats, that's what you're seeing here, which have multiple layers to keep heat out, to keep water from touching their skin, and to keep them cool inside. They've got special Nomex hoods that go over their head to protect their ears before they put their mask on. And they've got breathing masks. Do you know up until like the 70s and 80s, firefighters didn't have breathing masks? they used these rebreathers that would just filter out the air that they were using, right? And it was like the 50s, I guess, that Scott Air started like producing, hey, maybe we could provide air packs for you all, right? And now these kinds of tanks are made of lighter material. They can hold 45 minutes of air. They've got special devices to help them be found if they get lost. They've got radio communications. And because of all of these tools, the strategies that they can use on the fireground and the frameworks for how they approach a fire situation are very different, right? So think about this. This is a house. It's a poorly drawn house. I'm not a designer. The little circle things are doors, and the square things are windows, and everything else is rooms, okay? So imagine that we're role-playing here, that you're a firefighter, and you pull up to a house, and you see fire in this corner. What do you want to do?
Shoot water in there.
Shoot water in there. You want to put that fire out, don't you? Does anyone disagree with Brett? Would anyone like to let the fire burn?
Maybe the fire has some valid opinions.
Maybe the fire has valid opinions. It is possible.
Maybe there's a bigger fire somewhere else.
Maybe there's a bigger, yes. Now we're getting into weird strategy stuff. Yes, that things happen on that. So our first instinct is to put this fire out. But the strategy for fire rescue for many years, for literally like 70 or 80 years, follows this acronym called RECEO. Rescue, Exposure, Confine, Extinguish, Overhaul. So extinguish is actually the fourth to last thing that we do. Rescuing the people in the house is what is critical. And as part of this model, what it says to do is not go and put this fire out. It's to go in through the front door and attack the fire that way. And even in updated models, so we have the Revis model, which is rescue, exposure, ventilate, attack, salvage, which is the notion of if we ventilate or knock out windows, we can clear some of the smoke out in the room and see what we do, right? And the reason for all of this, and the reason for attacking this way, is that if we bring a fire hose this way and we spray water on the fire, what happens is that the fire spreads to the unburnt part of the house where people may be at. So the idea behind this for 70 or 80 years has been that if we attack it this way, we stand a higher chance of killing the other people that are in the house or causing more damage to the house, right? It makes total sense of why you'll see firefighters attack it this way, right? The problem is that that's wrong. And that whole strategy I just told you that firefighters have followed for 80 years is wrong and has only been proven wrong over the past 2 years. Right? Think about that, right? Over the past 2 years. The updated strategy is called the previous model, which is like perimeter rescue, exterior ventilation, interior and search with overhaul and storage, salvage. The idea being this, that it is proven now from studies they've done of burning people's houses down and seeing what happens. No, they do it in a lab. That an initial quick attack to this from an exterior, so a quick spray on this, and then coming in another way actually improves the entire situation. The reason, and actually, so what's funny about this is when you read this, so this has been proven, it's been around for about 2 or 3 years now, and fire companies fight against this. They're like, no, that's wrong. Because what's happened over the years is that we've gotten the advice that if we attack it this way and we spread it, or that if we attack it this way, we will spread it. And that advice, that idea, that concept, we've treated as absolutes. When we come up with ideas and approaches and frameworks, and we just say, this is how you do it, and we don't think about revisiting that every time. We teach people over generations that's the truth, and not to question the truth. When we teach people recipes or solutions instead of recognition of problems and the forces that apply to them, we end up with wars about who is right and who is wrong, right? And in a fire situation, no amount of strategy can tell you what to do minute by minute on a fire ground. And no framework or pattern can tell you what to do line by line in a project. The notion that we can do this amazing design up front and we can figure out and solve all the problems that we're going to face ahead of time, no matter what the framework is bunk, right? We have to be able to change our mindset of that and change the mindset of the people coming up through that to think about it differently. So let's look at this for a second. One of the ideas that's out there is called clean architecture. How many have heard of that? Was that an UG? Like, I don't. Are you?
I've heard of it. I've heard of it.
You've heard of it. You will say no more. I've heard of it, and I will say no more. Okay. Clean architecture is an idea coming primarily Uncle Bob, so Robert Martin, and the idea is kind of separation of things, right? But before we look at that, let's look at the normal structure of Rails, right? So the normal structure of Rails is pretty familiar. I hope most of you know this. You have a controller, it accepts a request, the controller figures out what models are needed. The models, through the active record pattern, understand how to talk to the database. The controller then also figures out what view to show it or what the response is and passes the model over to the view. So this is pretty standard, and if we go into a Rails application, we know where that stuff lays at, right? So models are in app models, controllers are in app controllers, and views are, amazingly enough, in app views. Now, this is standard Rails. This is vanilla Rails, right? Now, let's take a look at clean architecture. So the clean architecture looks like this. You have entity gateways, entity gateway implementations, which are talking to a database API. They're talking to more entities, and you've got an interactor, which is crossing boundaries to a request and a response model. That's talking to a controller, which crosses the boundaries, and presenters, which have a view model and a view, right? Where does this live in your Rails application? Lib. Lib, that's right. That is where everything goes in Rails, is lib, right? The problem is this. When we take a look at something like this and we say, this is correct for Rails, this is how you scale a Rails app, it's like trying to say, this is how we're going to approach this house fire, right? Like, it will always be the same, because it's not true, right? What we want to do instead is understand what leads to this design. At what point do we recognize that what we have are interactors? Like, what forces cause us to say, like, an interactor makes sense here? In what sense do we really need to think about where the boundaries of the application are and how we split those out? So if we take one of the ideas from here, the idea of a presenter. The idea of a presenter, the forces behind this are that you have complex UI logic for your UIs, and you want to separate that UI logic out from your business logic, right? So if you, like I have in one of my applications, a patent record, right? Like, so it's a patent model, and it's an active record, so it talks to a patent table, right? It's a row gateway model. And I have UI logic that is specific to that, but I don't want that in that model because that's the wrong place for it. So in this idea of I have complex logic for my UIs, I don't want that in my model, the pattern of presenter makes sense. And so some of the code for that, if you all can see that, where we're defining some fields and what form fields and importable fields and class stuff, it's a way for us to define logic-specific stuff not in our views, that our views will use, but isn't in the actual model itself, right? So this was extracted out into a presenter, and it works phenomenally well. Like, we end up having a generic view layer that consumes the presenter and just displays the stuff without us ever having to write views to display it. And it works fantastically for our specific use case. What happens is that people hear that and they go, that's fantastic, right? What I want to do is match that. And seeing teams try to bend their apps to match things like clean architecture or domain-driven design, or worse, people saying you can't have good Rails apps unless you're doing this stuff. That really worries me. I see more problems with applications where the development teams try to adopt frameworks and patterns blindly than I've ever seen from just bad code. Right? A 500-line controller, and I have seen 500 and 1,000-line controllers. I've actually seen a 10,000-line controller before. But a 1,000-line controller, I can do something with that, right? There's refactoring tools that you can use for that, and concepts, and we can extract methods out of it, and we can break things into code. When we take a Rails app and we try to bend it into this weird thing, we don't try to grow into there, but we start from like bending it into stuff. Now, if I have to take something like that over, not only do I have to decode what the code is, because the whole goal of software is to communicate to another developer what you're asking the computer to do, I not only have to figure out the normal stuff, I have to figure out how that works in this weird thing, right? And I pulled down, and I won't show this, but like I've pulled down some of the how you do domain-driven design in Rails, or how you do clean architecture in Rails. And I have a hard time following the logic that's in there, right? Because we're saying that we need a model view controller architecture, and then we're gonna put all of these patterns on top of it without really saying we're gonna grow our system, right? Great maintainable software comes from the application of understanding design patterns and lots of different knowledge about different things, combined with taking what you're doing with your current code and specific things of that, combined with reviewing how that code fits in the system afterwards. That is how we produce great maintainable code, right? It's not through we're gonna reach for some magic framework and that's gonna solve all of our problems, right? When we think as fire rescue, we had the notion of pre-fire planning. And 90% of our fire-ground problems could be solved through pre-fire planning, because we would know where the hydrants were, we would know where the standpipes were, we would know what chemicals the building was storing in it, we would know where the entrance and exits were and that kind of thing. And so if we had a problem, we could find what was going on with that, and we could adjust on the fly with it. But we never approached an individual fire situation as saying, like, we've got the plan. Because we had one situation where the main entrance for a furniture store that we knew we were going into, we couldn't get the door open, and when we finally did get the door open, and it turned out they had stacked mattresses against that door, and that's where the primary fire was. That wasn't where we should have gone in at. So what we have to do is take every situation, take all of the knowledge that we have, but then approach each situation with fresh eyes, figure out what we need to do, and then afterwards figure out what we need to do to improve. Right? So paying attention to our software will allow things like domain-driven design, allow interactor pattern, allow these things to emerge from the code. Because great designs emerge, they aren't designed from the beginning. No plan survives first contact with the enemy, if you've heard of that, right? And our code is really no different. So what I want to do is share a couple of the things that have worked for me in increasing your ability to listen to what the code is saying. So one of the things that we need to do is understand where our industry has been with code. If you haven't known it, the idea of software has been around for a while, right? Like I mentioned to somebody earlier that I did Cold Fusion, and they were like, oh, that was before I was born. And I'm like, no. Like, I don't think that that's true yet. It will be true at one point, but that's not true yet. But the overall notion of software has been around for a long, long time. The notion of model view controller has been around for a very long time. And as such, some of the ideas that we're talking about, data context interaction, CQRS, domain-driven design. Domain-driven design, Eric Evans wrote that book in 2003, right? Like we've had a lot of time to see what happens in different languages and different industries as part of that. We've watched the .NET world go through some of the stuff that the Rails world is going through now. I was in Austin many years ago for the Alt.NET conference and watched some interesting things about DDD that we're seeing now in the Rails community, because other languages and domains have been through before, and we don't study what happens in our industry, right? We don't spend a lot of time. How many of you, as a fun activity, read code? A couple of you do. That's awesome, right? Because that's, we most of the time as developers, we spend all of our time writing code and very little time reading other people's code and to see what happens. And by reading other code, we learn what not to do, kind of like what dragons lie within, right? Like, here be dragons, this is why you shouldn't do this kind of stuff. So, the first, as we build up kind of thinking of pre-fire planning, there's some base knowledge to build. One of those things is the idea of design patterns. So if you haven't seen the Gang of Four book, the design patterns book, It's a great book. It's not a great book for beginners because it's Eric Gamma's PhD thesis, but they do some great stuff of defining what a pattern is. So the elements of a pattern are that it has to have a name of some sort, has to have intent, motivation, an implementation, and a consequence of what happens when we use this. That's when we think of patterns and we go, hey, we're going to use model view controller, we need to think about all of these things. So let's take a look at model view controller real quick. Right, so the name of it is pretty straightforward. The reason that we use it, the intent, is to separate the presentation of the model from the view and the wiring of the model to the view. So the motivation behind it is that a web application has many models which need to be interacted with by end users. Does that sound like most of our web applications? Interactive part of this.
Yes.
Does that not, are there those of you who that does not sound like your web application that you built? What number am I holding up?
3.
Okay. This side, what number am I holding up?
4.
Okay. What number am I holding up over here?
5.
Okay. Everybody together, what number am I holding up?
1.
Okay, that's good. Okay. Just making sure we're all around. That's okay. Motivation. So that if we think about that is our we don't think about that with Rails. We don't think about why we use Rails. But part of the motivation behind MVC is that we have models that need to be interacted with end users. If we start building an application where that's not the case, Rails might not be a good fit for us, right? Or at least that paradigm isn't. The implementation of this, pretty straightforward. View model controller should be in separate classes. View depends on the model and not vice versa, right? A model should not depend on the view. That's pretty good knowledge. Yeah. Consequences might be overkill for simple systems where the model has very little behavior. Rails has made it really easy to go Rails new and I have like a one controller that doesn't talk to a database. Not a great MVC thing, right? That's part of it. So the whole idea behind this is understanding not just what the patterns are, but what the consequences are, what the motivation are. Patterns aren't just recipes, they're knowledge bases for us to be able to recognize things. And while we're on topic of recognizing things, another thing is the idea of being able to recognize duplication. If you've not seen Jim Wyrick's talk on Kinesence, it is an amazing talk, and I got to see Jim do it live in an Orlando Ruby conference. Jim talks about that when we talk about duplication, we tend to think about the code looks the same. But that's not the only sources of duplication. Right? Naming is a duplication. The parameters that we pass into a method, if we keep passing the same parameters into a method, that's duplication. Duplication of concepts and ideas, right? Those are all things that we need to recognize as part of our base knowledge, is being able to recognize duplication of different things. And then the last thing is being able to recognize things which are the same and things which are going to change. I have a colleague of mine, Alan Shalloway, has this thing called commonality variability analysis. So this is interactive, just so you know. Okay, what are these?
Pens.
Pens, that's the correct answer. Okay, what is common about these?
Mass.
Mass, okay. They write, okay.
Blue.
They what?
They're blue.
They're blue?
Cylindrical.
Okay. From there, they're blue. Okay, they're cylindrical, that's right. Okay, so if what they have common about them is that they can both write, can I use either one? Can I swap it out, one for the other? Yes?
If you don't care about color.
Oh, who said that? So if you don't care about color, why would I care about color?
Well, you might want to care about color if you want to make a point, if you want to emphasize something.
That's right. Yes. So if we think about, okay, so if, I don't have a way of drawing this. If I was building out shape classes, could I have square inherit from rectangle?
Sure.
Sure. Yeah. Why? Because a square is just a specialized form of a rectangle, right?
It's also more restricted.
It's also
more restricted.
It is also more restricted, right? You cannot swap a square for a rectangle, right? Because in some places you may try to set the width and height separately, Just like here, we need to understand what's common and what varies about them for our use case and our context, right? That's the kind of thing that we need to be able to understand. Because if one of these is blue and one of them's black, that's true. I can draw it if you need to. If we need black ink and that matters to us, we can't swap these out one for the other. And in our code, if we just say, hey, these are the same objects, but they vary in ways that are like that, we can't just swap them out one for the other. We need to be able to understand that kind of thing with our code. So all of that is pre-planning, right? That's all precursors to writing our code. When we actually start to write our code, oh, go ahead, question.
Actually, the most interesting part is that could be an emergent condition that you can't pre-plan. You don't find out until later that there's a distinction between these two things. And this can impact your class hierarchy or how you prioritize stuff or whatever.
So what he was saying is that it could be something that we discover later on that we can't do that. And if we have made the fundamental assumption in our code that these are the same, and we've let that permeate our entire code base, now guess who's going to be working all weekend to rip that out? Okay, so this is all precursors to writing code because we need knowledge coming into our code base. Oh yes, one more question.
Yeah, I have a question. Are you getting into functional programming at this point?
No. Sorry. So why is that? Why did that trigger that for you?
Because a part of functional programming is that you don't have objects or you don't inherit. I mean, at least from my understanding, I'm not a functional programmer.
Are you going to say something, Scott?
No, I'm just kidding. Well, no, yes, but no.
Yes, but no. Okay. That made the okay. We will not get on a tangent about functional programming tonight. So the idea, part of the idea of functional programming is really the idea of immutability, right? And there's some of that, but I don't want to dig in. That's not what we're digging with it. So
I think she was talking about type substitutability.
Oh, type substitute. Okay.
Which is exactly what you were talking about. It's just the language is going to change between.
Okay.
Like Haskell and Ruby.
Okay. We're not going to get into that right now. Okay. So now let's talk about writing code. Sorry. Because all of this knowledge that we've got needs to come in, needs to be there when we start building this, right? From the fire rescue side, there are volunteers who have never had any training in their life other than what they've done. And there's actually a fire science degree where people study all aspects of fire engineering and fire science, and they understand fundamentally how that all works. And they both bring different ideas to a fireground situation to be able to deal with. Okay, so we want to be in that same kind of position. We want to have a strong base of knowledge to be able to pull from when we actually go to write code. Because when we write code, we're trying to solve a problem. We're going to make it green and make it clean. We have a specific context that we need to operate in, right? And this is one of the reasons that I love test-driven development. It keeps us focused on the problem we're trying to solve by kind of forcing us to think about how to specify it as a test, right? Like, what's that next step that we're trying to do? And the design aspect of TDD focuses that. So if I'm like, okay, I'm prepared, I have my knowledge, I've understood my design patterns, I'm gonna write this code. The first thing I'm gonna do is try to express that as a test, right? And I've got to think about how are people going to use the code? What are my dependencies going to be, right? Like, I'm really thinking about the design of the thing I'm about to write. So once I go into that and I've got my test, now the next thing is we're going to write actual code. And when we write code, I'm going to refer back to the Gang of Four book because they talk about 3 specific things that we need to do while we're writing our code itself. So one of those is this notion of design to interfaces. So this is not Java interfaces. That's not what this is about for those of you from Java.NET world. The idea behind this is what's known as intentional programming. How many of you have used a crappy API before? Me too. If we let that API that's crappy, even if we wrote the API that's crappy and we're like, now that's really bad, we shouldn't let that change our design of things. Part of the idea of patterns and of designing the interfaces is that we should write the code that we want, that expresses the idea we're trying to do, right? That we want to write the code that we want. we don't write the code that we're required to use, right? If I want to say here, open door, I should have that as my method name, open door. No matter if the API on the other side is issue unlock code, wave badge, pull on handle, run, right? Like I don't care about any of that. I should be able to say open door. And then I use different patterns like adapters and facades to simplify the interface so that I'm writing the API that I actually want, right? So this idea of intentional programming is write the code you want to write, then adapt the code you have to interface with to do what you need it to do, right? Don't let the crappy code you have to work with, even your own, drive your design. Now, the second thing is, we're like, okay, I'm going to write this. Now, the second thing is favoring delegation over inheritance. So anytime that like I need to do something and like a couple of classes need to do that, the tendency is to say, let's create a base class and move everything up in there, or let's override active record base and just throw it all in there. Instead, think about
make it final.
Make it final. Those Java people, yes. Instead, think about how we can delegate that to other objects. In fact, a common pattern of this is people ask me, how do you test private methods? Like I have a private method that I want to test. It's like, okay, we're not doing TDD, but if you have a private method you want to test, that means that that method wants to be public on an object that is private to the class that you're currently operating in. So make it public, it wants to be public somewhere else, right? And that's kind of how we're favoring that. It's like move it to an object where we're delegating to that object instead of saying, okay, well, it all has to be in here. And so lastly is we want to encapsulate the concept that varies. So when we think about these pens, right, the thing that varies is the color of it, but we don't necessarily know that going in. But what we want to be able to recognize is, can we identify the things that are the same? Can we identify the things which are different? And move forward from there. So now that we've written our code, what we need to do is figure out how it fits into our general solution. Right? When we're writing code, we kind of have this telephoto lens zoomed way in on our code that we're writing. And that is not a great way to figure out how it fits into the rest of our code base. So we need to step back and zoom out and see what's going on across our code. So a friend of mine, Cory, wrote a book called Understanding the 4 Rules of Simple Design. And I like the notion of 4 Rules of Simple Design as written by Kent Beck to think about post-review, right? So we've done our pre-fire planning, we've attacked the fire. Now afterwards, let's review how our code fits in. So there's 4 things that 4 Rules of Simple... Can I shut that off?
There's another one.
I think it's sorry. I don't know how to use a mic. That 4 Rules of Simple Design talk about. The first is that it passes all the tests. So if you don't do test first, just ignore that. The second is that it expresses the idea we need to express. So if we're working in the domain of automotive engineering, right, the objects that we're creating, the ideas that we're expressing should match the domain that we're operating in. And that should emerge from the code that we're doing as part of that. And if it's not, if we look at a code, like a snippet of code, and we're like, I have no idea what that does, like, or I have to like look at these 3 things, that's a good idea to say, maybe I need to extract that to a common method to clean that up and have this express what is really going on here as part of that. The next thing is no duplication. So again, going back to Connaissance, it's looking at the duplication that's there. And finally, it uses minimal classes and methods. This is the last thing on the list. This is in priority order. I am okay with duplication in multiple classes if it helps with readability, but not just for extraction's sake, right? Not like, we shall only have 3 methods in any class, and once you get over 3 methods, you need another class, right? I have seen that kind of logic before. I've seen, in enterprise IT, you see a lot of things that scare you, and those are some of the things that I've seen. So all of this together, this is for Cecy now because she said she likes, it was there before anyway, so this is the Tokyo Fire Department's mascot. Can you believe that? Tokyo, like that, it surprised me. So kind of pulling that together, when we think about software, we don't want to start with saying, if we're going to do Rails, we're going to do all of this stuff up front, right? Instead, we want to focus on building our knowledge base. right? So what are the things that are out there? We're reading code, we're looking at what other domains do, we're understanding design patterns, we're understanding other frameworks. We understand the goals of clean architecture, we understand the goals of command query separation, like we understand what those things are. But then along the way, we're watching our code, and we're watching for these ideas to emerge, and we're recognizing those patterns, and then pulling those out and setting those aside. And then watching as those grow into bigger patterns, and pulling those out and setting those aside. And we're doing that through reviewing our code, looking at these 4 rules, looking at other things that are part of that. And then finally, by being awesome. And that's what we all should really be coming to do. So that's it for me. There's my contact information. As I kind of mentioned, I'm with the Iron Yard. I found, this is your logo, right? Austin Rails logo, okay. I found it and I just want to make sure. So here's all of my contact information and everything. So if you have questions, let me know. So are there any questions before I close out? I will answer that question. We have some stickers, so if you want them, they're limited edition blue stickers. They're limited edition because now that Travis knows I took some from the office, he won't let me take any more of them. So come get them before he comes steal them from me. So thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. Have a good night.
Thank you, Cory. So thanks again to Capital Factory. Clean up after yourselves. We'll be doing the happy hour, so you can chat with us there. Meaty Riley's. So go out onto Brazos right here. Go straight down to 6. Take a left, and it'll be just 1 or 2 bars down on your left.
And there will be other people going. So you can ask, like, hey,
going?
Follow the mass.
Yeah.
And thank you for sponsoring.
No problem, Damon. Bye.